Well, once again, good morning. I'm going to begin with a question, but don't answer it quite yet. I'm coming back to that in a minute. Somebody put a bowl of Fritos or a bowl of M&Ms in front of you. Which one would you pick? All right. Hang on. We'll get to the answers here in a minute. Okay. I want to start today with a quote from Jane Goodall. Remember her? Jane Goodall said this: "What you do makes a difference, and so you need to decide what kind of difference you want to make." All right? What you do makes a difference, and so you need to decide what kind of difference you want to make. I thought about that because what we see going on in the Gospels today, or in the Gospel reading today, is Jesus making a difference. He's making a difference in the life of someone. This particular person had a withered hand, as we learn, but he's always making a difference in some way in people's lives. What you do. So I also considered, what has Jesus been doing up to this point in the Gospel of Mark? Because this is early on. This is the 3rd chapter today. Mark doesn't begin with anything in his gospel about Jesus' birth or childhood. Mark begins with Jesus at his baptism in the river by John. That's how he starts out. So we're on the move pretty quickly with Mark and Jesus' life. So what has Jesus been doing in these first 3 chapters? Well, in chapter 1, verse 39, we find out Jesus went and preached in their synagogues throughout all of Galilee. So that's what he's been doing in the first 3 chapters. He's been traveling around Galilee and preaching. Now, all this started out well enough. Early on, chapter 1:27 says the response was amazement at, quote, his new teaching with authority. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. But today doesn't get quite the same positive response. Today's encounter is different. Jesus is in the synagogue, it's on the Sabbath, and he heals this man. Now, most of us are aware that there's a prohibition about doing work on the Sabbath. This is a long-standing practice in the history of Israel. But it wasn't a complete ban either. You could do some work on the Sabbath, healing in other words, if it was a life or death situation. That was all right. And so some of this was interpreted a little differently from place to place in Galilee. But in this place, it's almost as if they placed this guy in front of Jesus. No, just daring him to do something. And of course, he does something. He heals him and then gives him a lecture about it. So this one doesn't end in such a positive manner. This one ends with the Pharisees and the Herodians, the leaders there, plotting to destroy Jesus. Which makes me ask the question, what is wrong with people? And you can also ask that question in our own day. What is wrong with people? Really? A lot of people. There are 7 instances in the Gospels where Jesus healed somebody on the Sabbath. So he is busy in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Now this guy's healing the hand, troublesome as it might have been for this individual, it's not exactly life-threatening. They could have waited until the next day, but not for Jesus. Jesus is not all that concerned with legalistic approaches to grace and mercy. He's going to meet a human need when he sees it. So I'd like to pair this with a teaching or a line from the epistle this morning, 2 Corinthians. We just heard this read. That the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies, in our mortal flesh. All right. So the life of Jesus is supposed to be reflected in our own actions, in our own thoughts, in our own way of thinking. So, let's go back to the question. How many people in here, if you had a bowl of M&Ms or a bowl of Fritos, would pick the M&Ms? Okay, that's incorrect. All right. That might be right on another sermon I preach sometime, but not today, because I want to talk about salt. Jesus, to drive home this message about having our body, or his life, reflected in our bodies, picks an extraordinarily good example. And it comes from Matthew's gospel as part of the Sermon on the Mount when he said, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, he could have picked any other example about getting involved, making a difference maybe, but he picked salt. He picked salt. And so this week, yesterday in fact, I refilled our salt shaker at home, our table salt, little granules falling down. And so I was thinking about that. So I just put that in here this morning. You are the salt of the earth. You are the one called to make a difference in season life, is what he's saying to us. And I read a book a number of years ago called Salt, A World History. Anybody seen this book? Okay, it's about that thick. And it's got all kinds of details about the history of salt and the importance of it to human life and cultures. Let me just give you a few examples. This is Mark Kurlansky giving us a few secular examples. Salt, he says this, salt has made a glittering, often surprising contribution to humankind. It has influenced trade routes, establishment of cities, provoked and financed wars, secured empires. Sounds kind of like gold in our own day, doesn't it? Something very valuable. Another name for salt is sodium chloride. But Jesus knew saying, "You are the sodium chloride of the earth," was not going to cut it. So he uses salt as an example. Did you know that baby formula contains at least 3 kinds of salt? I learned that in this book. Magnesium chloride, potassium chloride, sodium chloride. The average adult, if you're average, or you might think you're above average, but if you're average, you contain about 250 grams of salt, which is 3 or 4 salt shakers in your body. And we are constantly losing it, aren't we? So it needs to be replenished. Now, yes, I know there are people that have too much sodium, and that's also an issue. But in general, you have to replenish your salt. When I was a kid at camp, they used to have a salt tablet dispenser right by the water fountain. So when you're out playing, you come in, you take a couple of salt tablets. This practice has probably been banned by the Medical Association because these things are no longer available. We give cows salt licks, right? Why? They need it. They need it. And so salt is essential to human life. Roman soldiers used to be paid in salt. That's how valuable it was. Now, salt has, like everything, some upsides and downsides. I learned in seminary every analogy breaks down, so don't take it too far. So, these are the downsides of salt. In a drought or a famine is bad, right? Salt can kill. Salt rusts things. The Dead Sea is known as the Salt Sea as well. So those are some negative things, but we're not focusing on those. We're going to talk about the positive things, about being the salt of the earth. It is very versatile, salt is. It is used for all kinds of things, and it can season lives. We even use it to make roads safer, don't we? Put some salt down when it's icy, snowy. Good people, well, they're the salt of the earth, aren't they? So you see, we have a lot of uses in a positive way for this image of salt. Let me give you some biblical examples that you likely don't know of. In Ezra 6:9, salt is mentioned as a condiment, a provision for the temple. Exodus 30:35 mentions incense that has been mixed with salt. Ezekiel 16:4, I'm sure we don't do this anymore, newborn babies were rubbed in salt along with water and oil, which was the belief to protect them from evil. Ezekiel. Numbers 18 and 2 Chronicles. Eating salt with another person signified a bond which came to be known in the Bible as a salt covenant. A salt covenant. 2 Chronicles. Ought you not to know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingship over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt? Salt was to the ancient Hebrews, and still modern Hebrews, a symbol of the eternal nature of God's covenant. You can dissolve salt, but you can also dehydrate that same salt again and it'll form into crystals. So it's immutable, really. And that's why it becomes a symbol for an eternal, lasting covenant. You are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they used salt mixed with water to summon their gods. And this is often thought to be one of the origins of Christian holy water. Same kind of practice. So salt, well, another thing, it's the only rock that we humans eat, or you're supposed to eat. It purifies, right? It preserves, it seasons, it cleanses, it binds people together. What else does so much? Very few things. So Jesus turns to the example of salt when he's talking about the theme of be like me, which is what this is saying in our epistle today, that the life of Christ may be seen in our mortal bodies. And he says to them, you are the salt of the earth. And what does that mean at its most basic level? When he says it, I think it means, like salt, you're most effective when you're mixed up into life, when you're involved in human need and compassion, like Jesus was this morning on the Sabbath when he heals this man, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. So if we believe that we are in fact the salt of the earth, we should be willing to be and committed to make a difference, to do something on Jesus' behalf and with Christ, conduits of grace, not our own grace, the grace of God. So authentic Christian discipleship involves being and doing. Being and doing. Jesus is also saying, I think here, that Christianity, like salt, is best expressed and seen by the effects it has. The effects on us individually with our own faith internally, and the effects that we have in making a difference in society. So ministry in the name of Christ is essentially functional. It's calling us to do something and be something, of course. So salt, few things make life so enjoyable, delicious, healthy, better. So go forth, you little bundles of sodium chloride, and make a difference today. Do something. Last image. When you're driving around, or at least me, I see a bumper sticker or window sticker every now and then, and it's for a company that does fishing gear and shirts and things like that, fishing equipment, and it's called Salt Life. Seen this? Somebody's back of their car? Salt Life. Well, that, my friends, is a perfect Christian analogy. Salt Life. So next time you see one of those things in the car, when you're seeing in the car in front of you, don't think about new shirts and a new fishing rod. Think about Jesus. Salt Life, that's what we're called to do. I like to think of salt. It's not just a substance, but it's a frame of mind. It's a frame of mind and spirit and heart. So back to Jane Goodall. What you do makes a difference. So you need to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Amen.